Good evening. Appreciate you all being here today at the Katy Autism Support Group discussion on special needs considerations. Mary Ann Hughes with Special Family Transitions, and so happy that you all could be here today to discuss this very important topic. And I have a special guest today. Leona Filis is a special needs attorney, so she can address some questions that maybe I can't answer, or maybe a little bit better than I could answer in some cases. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I went through and why I formed Special Family Transitions. So some of you know my story. So I was married for over 20 years and have two boys on the autism spectrum. And everything I thought was going fine. And until after over 21 years of marriage, I found out that my marriage was no longer going to be happening. So I had to face divorce and figure out what to do to be successful in my divorce and to make sure that my kids would have what they need as part of the process. And so that was my main intent in the divorce, even though it wasn't something that I had planned for, thought about, expected, but I was faced with that and had to figure out what to do to make sure that my kids would have what they needed during and after the divorce. It was a hard time for all of us, but throughout the process, didn't really have time to worry about how I felt. Didn't really take time for myself in the beginning and really focus on what my kids needed in terms of their immediate needs, not really having a transition from one day dad being there to not to the next. So I had to deal with the behavior issues, emotional issues that were faced to them, but also in terms of how I was going to get through the process and how we were all going to make the best outcome possible. And so once I kind of got a handle on things, one of my keys to success, and I kind of summarize what worked for me here. And so I want to kind of go over some of those points, then we'll make it definitely interactive. So realize that over the years I hadn't really been taking care of myself, putting my needs last, and so then decided, okay, well, I guess self-care is important after all, and I started taking better care of myself. And then so I think that helped me get in a better mindset for everything else that I had to do as part of the process. And then I found that educating myself on the divorce process itself, what I had to do, what I had to learn about what was going on around me, kind of understanding maybe the reasons behind the emotional aspects and what was going on in my personal life, as well as planning and researching for what my kids needed in the future and what they were going to need, because really hadn't taken time in the past, even though my kids were, I guess at that point in high school years, to figure out what they would be doing post-high school. And so the big concern was, what was it going to take for my kids to be taken care of in the future? So even though as part of a divorce, as I learned, you're entitled to, in a community property state, 50%, if not more, depending on the situation of your community property. But then the kids' needs were a different matter altogether. And so I had to kind of figure out how that would look. And so there's lots of ways you can go about a divorce, and some of them may be uncontested, meaning you come to an agreement, and then other times it may be more conflict or issues involved, and in that case it may take longer and a longer process, and longer process usually means more time and money. So those two are definitely related. So as much as you can, I'd recommend kind of knowing up front what you want, and hopefully working with your soon-to-be ex as to coming to an agreement, because if you don't, then it just gets kind of drawn out. You might go into a litigation process, and that gets more complex and expensive. And so I never expected my divorce to take as long as it did and cost as much as it did, but it did, because I had to basically figure out what my kids needed and how to make sure that they would get what they need out of the process. And so Yeah, so in terms of the research I had to do to figure out what would be available out there in the future post-high school for my kids, because there's very few programs that would meet my level of need for my kids. They're all different ends of the spectrum, and so each one required a different type of outlook. And the programs are very expensive and hard to find, hard to get into, and there's waiting lists. And then the programs which you may get at some point coverage for through public benefits and government programs, you're not assured when you're going to get them, if you're going to get them, what the quality of those programs may be, which ones will be a good fit for you, and then constantly monitoring that. So we were still on waiting lists and never know, you don't know when those are going to happen in terms of being able to help you. But even then, even if you do, you still may want a program that is private pay or that requires you to have a significant investment to make sure that they're going to get what they need to be successful in the future. And so I had to figure out what those costs would be, so I knew what I could expect or accept as part of the divorce. So if I had, had a better idea of that going in, I would have known from the beginning what to accept and not to accept. And so I couldn't really make an offer or counter an offer since I didn't really know what those numbers were. And so that was a long planning process for me to try to figure out what my kids' needs were going to be and what programs were out there and how much they would cost. And to me, that was kind of the formula that I had to use to try to figure out what would be acceptable in terms of child support and ongoing support for my family. And divorce can be a scary thing. And so I think trying to reach out and get support from other people is definitely helpful, whether it's support groups, people that have been through it, Facebook groups, all kinds of things that you go out there. So a lot of people try to keep it inside and may think it's taboo, but I don't think it is that way anymore as much as it used to be. I think talking to people that have gone through it, I think helps a lot, and like you all doing here today to share information, which I think is great. And so as part of the divorce too, I think setting a vision and knowing where you want to be. So some people look at it as a short-term thing. I have an idea of what I wanted my future to look like and how I want to get there. So I knew I wanted to carry myself in a certain way and kind of take as positive approach as I could so that my kids would see who I am and what I stand for, and try to have their father also be in a positive type of outlook as well. Of course, you can't control other people, and I've learned that, but sometimes the behaviors do feed on each other. So as much as you can, and I don't know, one situation, but try to keep as positive as you can, as professional as you can. And divorce, even though it's a very personal matter, really comes down to being a business, legal and financial transaction, because it's what you got to do to end the former relationship, but you're still going to be parents to the children, and you got to figure out how that's going to work too. So definitely try to get the best outcome you can, the best financial deal, because this is your one shot to really get it right. Not that you can't go back later and ask for more and make modifications, but then it gets more complicated, and most people would rather go through the legal process one time and be done, hopefully. And so I found in my case that it was too much for me to do all on my own. So I had to find a lawyer, knowledgeable in special needs, and that was kind of hard to do. And there's people like Leona who definitely have great expertise, but my case was a little too complicated for her to want to take on as a family law matter. So I had to find somebody who was more versed and willing to take on a complex case such as mine was for a lot of different reasons. And then you want to also try to see if you can get a financial person involved. There's some special needs financial planners that can help you figure out what the outlook is going to be, what the needs are going to be, and how to calculate that given all the factors that come into play. And sometimes people also use a what they call CDFA, is a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, which is someone kind of help you plan for what you're going to be receiving and how to plan for your future financial picture as well. So there's two sides of that. One is for you and what you're going to be looking at in the future and what to accept, and how to then use that money wisely. And then the second part is planning for the kids and advocating for their needs. And definitely as part of the legal process, you want to make sure that even if you use another attorney, you can partner with somebody like Leona, who understands the divorce decree and what needs to be in there. She can also review other people's proposals and language to make sure it's going to meet all the requirements to protect your child in the future, make sure they maintain their eligibility for government benefits. And so a lot of people want to just, kind of just not deal with the divorce and not want to have to fight, and would just rather not have the conflict and may just accept, whatever their ex may propose or soon to be ex. But, to me, this is, like I said, your time to stand up for what's right for you and for your family, and just keep it positive and just be as strong as you can. Not that you want to not negotiate, but do it in such a way that is fair to everybody. What's important in terms of Social Security is that you establish that the child has a disability. So, for instance, maybe obvious somebody does have a disability, but it helps to have the reports that you can then use either in the divorce process or afterwards to make sure that you're going to have the Social Security benefits and other benefits in the future. Talk about maybe having not exactly 50% share, and that has to do sometimes with different factors, like have they done some things that are not so nice, and there's different things that those could be, whether it's some financial issues, some adultery, whatever it might be. Those sometimes come into play, and so you may get more than 50%. So if someone says you're only going to get half or not even entitled to half, that may not be true. And what's also important to know is that child support is a big consideration for special needs kids. And so there's I saw it as two buckets. One is, what is your share of the estate going to be, whether 50% or more? And then the other bucket to me was child support, and trying to figure out what that number was going to be and negotiating that separately. And so as a special needs child, if they qualify as a child with somebody with a disability, then they can be entitled to indefinite child support, which means that unlike some divorces where child support may end at 18, special needs disabled child support will not end at 18 and can go on indefinitely. And it's important that those funds be paid into a first party special needs trust, also called a Medicaid Payback Trust, because if you don't, that's considered the child's money, and then you've got issues in terms of possibly having to lose benefits or pay some money back and so on. So it becomes a little tricky there. So you want to have an attorney, you make sure that they have the right language and wording in that document, and also as part of the decree. And also when you think about divorce, as you would whether special needs or not, you want to think about custody, who's got decision-making authority, what the possession time is going to look like, what your parenting plan, so basically anything that's important to you and for your children, and how you want to split the time with the other parent, what they're each be responsible for, so that there's an understanding there. Now what I learned is that any time really, not just over 18, but the ex doesn't always have to do those things, so just be aware of that. But if they don't, just keep a record, and then you can go back later and request more support on account of them not following through on what they had agreed to. And you want to make sure they have some type of health insurance. As a special needs dependent, they may be eligible for extended or lifelong health benefits through certain employers and insurance plans, so look into that. There's a form that you can fill out. There's also, besides private insurance, they can get Medicaid. If they apply for SSI also, then they would get Medicaid as part of that. And also, in terms of life insurance, it's a good idea to have the, I won't say, not the child, but the child's trust, which will be a third-party trust, special needs trust, as the beneficiary of that life insurance policy, because life insurance is one way you could try to plan for the expenses in the future, but of course that's not going to pay out until somebody passes away. You don't really want that to happen, but in the event that just to plan for the future, make sure that the right beneficiary is noted on there. Because if you used to be the beneficiary, then once you're divorced, then that will no longer apply, well, in most cases, unless you specify otherwise. And so you want to make sure that instead of going to the child, it's going to go to the child's trust. And there's other things you can do in terms of how to handle the money. There's an instrument called the ABLE account, which is a 529A, similar to a 529C college account, except this one gives you more flexibility in terms of how to spend some funds. There's limits per year, how much you can put on there. There's also a lifelong limit, but that's another way to try to manage the different monies and things that the money needs to be used for your special needs child. So I kind of said a lot over there, and so let me know if you have some areas you want to talk about some more, or some specific questions you might have.
Questions. How long did it take to finalize your divorce?
My divorce took a long time. It took over 2 years, and part of that was the time that it took me to find people to help me figure out what was right for my family. And part of it had to do with different things we did in the process, some negotiations, some mediation, some settlement conferences that, in my case, none of those things worked. So I ended up having to go to trial, and that in itself takes a long time. So most divorces don't go to trial, only 5% do, but mine did for various factors. And not that I would suggest that, because it's going to cost you a whole lot of money and take a lot of time and very emotionally draining. But in my case, it's something I felt I had to do for my children. And so the process, and I appreciate you asking that question, because everything that I went through in my divorce and all the energy I spent, I thought, well, there's no reason why anybody should have to go through what I just did. And so as I was coming on my process towards the end, I was thinking, this isn't right. It needs to be easier for other people. It was so hard to find information through my process, so hard to find the right people, what to do, and it just seems like there was so little information that was easily accessible. I'm sure it's out there. Some people have bits and pieces and may know a lot. It's just hard finding those people and putting everything all together.
You mentioned that, just in the industry, it's like special needs, divorce planning. I mean,
right.
We're not a minority.
Yeah, exactly. Because the numbers I've heard, 70 to 80% of special needs families get divorced. So it's
that was so weird. When I first heard that, my son was really young. He might have been like 5 years old, and I thought, I don't know anybody who has a special needs child like I do that is divorced. Well, fast forward, 20 years or less, and all those kids are now young adults, and there are so many couples going through divorce. Like a really good close friend of mine. People have to plan as moms, women. It's like, if I could write a book or just have a group with a bunch of young females and tell them, don't allow your husband to do everything. You need to know how to do that banking, the taxes. You need access to all credit cards, billing statements. You need to know everything. IDs, passwords.
But typically in a couple, if there's the breadwinner parent and the caregiver parent if she, let's say it's the wife, if she has any extra time away from caring for that child with special needs, she's up till midnight or whatever,
Up until 3
researching.
o'clock in the morning.
What can I learn more about how to address the latest behavior my child had? And so maybe there's some comfort in delegating and letting, you know, somebody else handle that part of it.
And I trust
But then you trust them until you don't. I mean, I think what Mary Ann was saying was so important, that to be positive, to be strong for your kids, but not for just the immediate needs that they have, but long-term. And that's hard to try and plan ahead for so many decades. I mean, how did you do that? Because you have you have high functioning and not high functioning, and so they have very different potential outcomes.
Right, that was the hard part, is I had kind of double the work, so I had to research both ends, right? So I had to find all the programs that my one with more needs could do, and honestly, the programs that I found, we visited, he wasn't even a candidate for, because of his behaviors, of his level of functioning, was not even enough to be at those places that would have liked him to be at. I mean, places that charge, you know, $80,000, $100,000 a year. Not that, you know, be gladly forking out that money, but they wouldn't even take him at that point in time. Now, I don't know about in the future. Maybe, you know, he's getting a little bit better now, but still, we don't know what the future holds. So it's multifaceted. One is finding right programs that could even work for them, and then on the other end, I had to find programs for my other son, and that was a whole other reason for the reason my divorce took so long, is I had to prove that my higher functioning son had a disability. And so that's what I was saying about establishing disability, because that in itself, like you said, becomes a matter of money. That people don't want to have to pay for ongoing support for someone that they think may or may not need support, I understand the kind of supports they may need, even if they are able to get a job in the future. We don't know if that person can keep a job, the other supports they might need in terms of coaching, in terms of anxiety, other things that come up in their lives as a young adult and, you know, way into adulthood. So yeah, it was, so the reason my divorce took a long time were definitely multifaceted. There were some other things going on the personal side too, but you gotta be comfortable with the, you know, your threshold of, you know, how much you're gonna take. Even though I said, you know, don't give up right away, that's, you know, you want to go for as long as it makes sense emotionally and financially to do so, right? I mean, you don't want to be spending your money all on lawyers to fight each other, because, you know, they have nothing to lose. They're gonna, as long as you want to keep fighting, then they're happy to charge you whatever they charge per hour, right? You know, try as much as you can to work with your soon-to-be ex-spouse or whatever the case may be, because, you know, as you come to an agreement and have an understanding, then you don't have to have all these other antagonistic type issues and lawyers contacting my lawyer, you contact my lawyer, instead of just talking directly. And you could solve, I'm not gonna say a percentage, but most of the discussions that we have via lawyers would have been much simpler if we just had them ourselves face to face and, you know, came to an agreement that way. So my 2 cents on that. But anyway, so with all of that, that's why I formed my business, was so people could have the information, share information, and have someone, resources, or for you know, for me having gone through, and also to connect people to other resources they might need, whether it be lawyers, financial planners, and other things that I learned through the process, and people that that are out there to make things, you know, make life a little bit easier. And I've still learned things every day about different special needs aspects, and now I do some stuff learning more about autism and the program doing there. I've gone through like a life coaching certification. I became a certified divorce specialist. All these things that years ago I never thought I'd be going down this road,
exactly.
right? You know, but here I am now, my whole new world. It's kind of giving me a whole new purpose too. So it is positive in a way. So you know, my son, the high functioning one, you know, he's excited to see me starting a business. Like, Mommy, what are you working on today? Is this your special project you're working on? And so today was a funny song on the radio that came on. I'm a survivor by Destiny's Child, and he didn't know that Survivor song. He thought it was one by Selena Gomez. Apparently has another one. But anyway, you listen to those words, those lyrics, and they actually hit home, because, you know, through our adversities, we become stronger and we find other reasons for living and new phases of our life. And so that's where I am now, and I'm very excited I can help people. And everyone that I've talked to have been so supportive, and definitely see a need for this type of service and putting myself out there, even though I'm used to think I was a private person, didn't want to share my personal life. Not that I'm spreading everything that happened in my personal situation, but I'm using that to help others so that they can overcome their challenges and find easier ways to get through their process. That's my intent in doing that.
So yeah, it would be so ideal and so wonderful if there was no, adversarial thing. But unfortunately, it's like what I'm seeing is that there is. Mostly, on like the special needs side of it. But I've told friends who have developing teens now, and I tell them, I said, you need to get all this information from your spouse, just period, because you just never know what's going to happen. They can get in a car accident and die tomorrow, and you wouldn't know anything. And
Those are all good points. I mean, there's so much that goes into play. I was watching a webinar the other day about marriage in a special needs family. There's so much that goes on. One, hopefully, if you have the communication, you're not going to run into other issues. But still, you never know. I mean, people go into marriage thinking they're going to be married forever, and sometimes, there's a lot of stresses with special needs kids and other things that come about in life that you kind of get so busy, doing other things and focusing on your children that you don't maybe focus on each other. And so whether it's financial things that you may do, whether it's other indiscretions or whatever it might be, or other interests or other businesses, and you just focus on what's important. And what's important to me is family and making sure everything's for the good of the family. Well, some people don't think that way, and that's why we have divorces, I guess. And so yes, I agree. I mean, you want to definitely, I'm saying about the self-care, always, as special needs moms, we always sometimes, can't speak for everybody, but people I've been in contact with, we tend to put our needs last, and we put our businesses last, or whatever it might be. And so, one advice I would also give to people, who want to spend all their time taking care of their kids, which they need a lot of care. But for me, I gave up my career when I had my child, and now I don't know that that's the advice I would give to a young woman. I would say keep working as much as you can, and find a way to have your children raised, and while you continue to work on your skills, just in case you have to go back into the workforce. I mean, thank goodness I had a degree and I had work experience, and so over the years, not that it was 20 years of doing nothing. I mean, I'm doing things for my kids and I'm learning, and everything I've learned my whole lifetime has come together in terms of what I'm doing now. But still, you always want to know that you're important, and that keep your confidence up, and know that you're worthy, and that you can fight for yourself, and you can fight for your kids if it comes down to that.
One of the slides from that webinar that I liked was this pie, and then there was a slice that they were cutting out, and it was a 20% of the pie. And what it was supposed to represent was a family of 5. You yourself are 20%. So is each other person in that household. And so you need to engage in the self-care, like you're saying, and then try to also make sure that if you have a couple of kids and one is special needs and one isn't, don't forget that 20% for the typical child also, because you don't want siblings to be resentful, but you can't lose yourself while you're in the middle of learning everything you need to learn to take care of your child the best way that you can. And that part is where you're up till midnight or 1 or 2 a.m. researching. And as far as going through a divorce at the same time, you're also grieving your loss. And learning all the things that you've kind of put aside because you were delegating and relying on the partner to do things. So it's a lot hitting you at one time.
Right,
and
for sure.
it's scary, and you have to make sure you don't lose sight of the long-term goals of protecting your child.
Right. So for me, I guess one reason I didn't come to any quick or rash decisions was the way it worked out in my situation. I did have a few months kind of to grieve or try to pull everything together. So I didn't have to make any decisions right away. Because I think the hardest part is when people feel like they have to make decisions in the heat of the moment when they're really in an emotional whirlwind. And that's the worst time to make a decision. Because you want to have your rational side talking in divorce, not your emotional side, even though definitely it's a very emotional process. But, as much as you can, try to work through your issues, whether it's therapy, whatever it might take, whatever it looks like to you, and just, in the divorce process, okay, this is what I need to do, whether you need to work with a coach or therapist or whatever it might be, to kind of like, okay, this is one side of the I'm going to consider, but also now this is my divorce business, hat on, and that's the way I approached it, as unemotional as I could. Divorce, you're going to have a lot of things being thrown at you. Just take one step at a time. Consult with your lawyers, with other people that you might need. Kind of think back. Don't ever respond right away. Whether in person or in a note. Just kind of take a day, whatever, to think about. How you want to best respond to a situation.
Like Marianne was saying, there's all these things you have to consider, and if you have somebody like Marianne who's been there, done that, done the research, she kind of will give you pointers and tell you what to think about.
Bless her heart, she has my friend contacted her, so.
Good, good.